Digger by Matt Martinek. We had done it before, many times in fact. The beginnings of it were much like the seeds of anything else, fertilized by chance. We had accidentally unearthed the remains of some poor kid's pet. From the looks of it, it was either a kind of hamster or small ferret. Its body was placed into a glass bottle, along with a note inscribed with its birth and death dates, and of course its name, Edgar. The metal lid of the bottle was jutting out of the soil just the tiniest bit, and my buddy Derek spotted it, instantly plucking it out of its burial spot without much thought or effort whatsoever. The bottle ended up broken, with glass shards spraying off of the filthy park bench it was thrown against. Edgar's sad little bones were strewn about. On a whim, I kept the skull, drilled a tiny little hole into each side of it too, and ran a chain through it to make a necklace. That was the start, I guess. It didn't seem significant at the time, but I suppose it was. The years passed, as did the times of youth. Before we knew it, we were already young men, or maybe not nearly men at all. We were diggers. It's all we knew how to be and everything we needed. The tools consisted of flashlights, hammers, shovels, and crowbars. Our muscles pushed the tools about and made them do the work. Our morbid fascinations made the work at all possible to begin with. The seed had exploded, with its tendrils reaching every lobe, the synapses firing, ablaze with a sickness very few knew the symptoms of. It was a dirty little secret kept amongst friends, because diggers don't say, they only do. Damn it, John, put that smoke out and help us for Christ's sake. I always had to rein him in, get him back on task. Oh, Tommy, would you chill out already? I'm just taking a tiny break. You don't want to break union rules, do you? Johnny flicked his ash to the ground as Derek and I toiled away in the dark, shovelful after shovelful, sweat dripping from our brows. It was a typical dig. We had it down to a science by then. We usually chose older plots, preferably from around 1910 to 1930, as we found that the majority of those didn't have burial vaults installed. Our concern was speed, and busting open a concrete vault is more time-consuming and difficult than one may think. Anything earlier than 1910, though, was pointless, unless you wanted to go home with nothing but a pocket full of bone dust. Been there, done that. We wanted somewhat intact skeletons, as that's where the money was. We could get about $800 for a few hours' work if the pieces were in good shape. Every once in a while, though, we would break the rules and hit a newer plot. If flesh and clothing remained, we could hoist a generous $2,000 for our troubles. Not a bad hour-to-wage ratio for something that we would probably do for free. It was quite a worthwhile venture. Well, if you didn't have any hang-ups about the stink or the risk involved. And the gelatinous flesh, that was always a little tricky. You always took some home with you, either stuck to your pant leg or dried to your shirt. Poor Derek once got it in his ponytail of all places. He was so paranoid about it that he tried to cut off all of his hair with a straight razor. His mom was pissed. It looked like hell. All right, fellas, I think we hit pay dirt. I heard the clank of the shovel hitting something hard as Derek gave us the good news. John finally joined us back at the plot. His timing was impeccable. Bastard, I thought. Nice of you to join us, Johnny. Thanks for the help. I flipped him off as I spoke. The gesture was captured as a shadow by the illumination of his flashlight. We gathered around as we carefully removed the dirt from around the edges of the coffin, which looked in terrible shape and barely held together. This was by far the hardest part. If you weren't careful, the calcified treasures inside could easily be damaged, and the night completely wasted. Thankfully, as we removed handfuls of moistened, stinking wooden fragments, we knew that we were in luck. Good thing, too. A year or so more and the coffin would have given way completely, with the earth claiming the treasure for itself. Nonetheless, there he was. Gerald Rainey, loving husband, 1852 to 1928. Pieces of the burial suit still remained, although tattered and hardened. Absolutely no visible flesh remained, so the only odor was from the mold itself and whatever processes the bugs and worms had going on. The skull was in decent enough condition. The teeth had fallen out and were strewn about the casket floor, but that was nothing new. The left femur was worn completely through at the middle, but that was the only glaring defect that would affect our price point. Everything else was pretty much as expected. The three of us gently collected the blackened bones and placed them into the multiple canvas bags we had brought for the transport home. I pocketed the corpse's wedding ring to hopefully sell at a later date. Who says crime doesn't pay? Afterwards, we replaced the dirt of the burial plot as quickly as we could. That was of utmost importance. It would be easy to jet out of there as soon as we snagged the bones, but patience was required to ensure no one expected a thing. The dirt needed to be level with the ground, nothing out of the ordinary. Any excess was shoveled into the weeds. After everything was neat and tidy, as we could get it at least, we jumped into the car and got the hell out of Dodge. That was our 19th dig in 2 years, spaced out between the oldest and most out-of-the-way cemeteries in the Tri-County area. Our record was intact, never caught. There aren't too many ghost stories about the tiny little shit town in which we reside, but the ones that do exist receive as much fanfare as possible. I mean, the town is boring. It's full of boring folks and boring activities. But Becky's grave, that isn't boring at all. I had thought about it often, but had never gone there myself. The story went that a woman named Rebecca Kring was burned alive in her home as the townsfolk suspected her of witchcraft and occult dealings. And of course, her spirit was said to roam the grounds of Snavely Cemetery, the original place of her burial. It's kind of a cookie-cutter story, sure. No, I didn't believe a word of it. That is, until the story gained a morbid update of sorts. A local man who just happened to be a self-proclaimed paranormal expert wrote an article about Becky's grave for his college newspaper. In it, he provided an interesting bit of information about the legend. He contended that Becky wasn't even buried in the cemetery at all, but she was instead interred further back in the forest near some swampland, and that he had seen it for himself. A few months later, this man died under suspicious circumstances. The doctors said it was something with his heart, but his friends knew better. They said that he was never the same since he visited that grave. His health deteriorated steadily, day by day, from the moment he returned home from the cemetery that night. He was only 20 years old. Needless to say, as I was always into the darker side of life, this more than piqued my interest. So I came up with this plan. I was going to find Becky's grave myself and rob that fucker, with a few friends, of course. As it was kind of a passion project of mine, Derek and John weren't really interested in helping me at first. The grave itself was most likely too old to provide anything of value, and who's to say it even existed at all? It could have very well been a gigantic waste of time. They thought I was nuts. But after a little prodding, I finally convinced them to join me in my little haunted expedition. Interestingly enough, on the very night after our high school graduation, we set out to find Becky's grave. We were now men, but we were diggers first, and diggers we would remain. So, as it turned out, Snavely Cemetery was little more than a family plot, by far the smallest actual graveyard I'd ever visited. If you weren't searching for it in particular, you wouldn't even realize it was there at all. The road was complete darkness, and the cemetery sign was tiny, but there we were, in the dead of night, entering the pathway, climbing the black hill by flashlight, carrying our tools and bags. Within 50 yards, we reached the plot itself, which was hidden to the left in a thicket of trees and bushes. It felt secretive, it felt off-limits. But we continued on nonetheless. The stones were few, and all as old as sin. I sprayed the beam of light across the faces of some of the worn granite markers, and within no time I came upon the Kring surname. I surveyed more than a dozen Kring plots, but Rebecca's was not amongst them, just as the article had stated. I did notice something interesting, however. There were 2 infant plots from the Kring family, 1 baby boy, 1 baby girl. Both died at 1 day old at about 5 years apart, brother and sister, connected not only by blood, but by fate itself. It seemed that this family was no stranger to pain on the grandest of scales. I paused for a moment, but Derek and John nudged me on past the cemetery, back into the trees. I became afraid. Past the first few yards of forest, we entered a boggy ground of mud and wetness that seemed to bleed juicier with every step. We had prepared for this and had worn the oldest boots and pants that we owned. It was like the ground wanted to stop us from continuing. It seemed hungry enough to suck us into its bowels whole. So I urged the boys to pick up the pace a bit. Every hair on my arms and neck stood edgewise as we trudged forward. My heart was pumping fast as more than a bit of nervousness poked at my innards. And then there came a moment in time when the party stopped moving at all. And Derek spoke up. "Tommy, man, let's turn back. There's nothing back here but mud and shit. It doesn't feel right anyways. Let's pack it in and go have some beers." John looked at him and shook his head in agreement. They both looked kind of ill. "Aw, come on, you two. Are you serious? Is it because of this ghost crap? It's the big 2020 digs." I was putting on a brave face, but deep down I wanted to join them in their retreat. "Nah, Tommy. We're not scared of anything. You know that better than anybody. Something just feels off, bro. Best to trust your instincts, right?" John's lip quivered as he tilted his head up at me like a puppy dog. "All right, pussies. Here's the deal. You guys go back to the car and wait for me. Take a nap or smoke a joint or some shit. I'll take the stuff and root around for a little longer, see what I can find. Can you do that for me at least?" I wasn't leaving empty-handed, not by a long shot. Derek shoved the 2 bags of tools into my chest and quickly began to make his way back through the mud pit. John wasn't far behind. I knew that they were pissed, but I wasn't giving up just yet. About 20 minutes passed, and it seemed like I was no closer to my goal. The mud was nearly up to my knees at this point, and my feet were now freezing cold. The bags slung across my back seemed to grow heavier by the second. Maybe it wasn't worth it after all. Or maybe it was just some made-up bullshit from some crazy guy trying to drum up paranormal business. Regardless, I realized that it was time to pack it in. Like my comrades, I turned around, defeated, and began to trudge back. It was over. But then, as it sometimes tends to do in life, fate played its hand. Within 10 steps of my retreat, my flashlight shone upon something that barely caught my eye. It was a small gravestone jutting out sideways a foot or 2 from the swampy mess off to the right of me. I approached slowly, unbelieving of what I had found. What else could it be? There was no inscription on the stone, but this did not stop me from quickly reaching for the shovel and plowing into the moist ground with reckless abandon. I worked and worked as quickly as I could, with shovelfuls of mess flinging over my head into the blackness behind me. The growing stink of methane tickled my nostrils as I dug further into the swampy bog. I thought about going back to the car to get the boys to help me, but there was a part of me that wanted it all to myself. I deserved it. I stayed when no one else would. She was mine to have and mine to take. It could have been an hour, or it could have been 3, I do not know. Time ceases during situations of true excitement, and I was never more excited than at that very moment when my ear caught the clunk of my shovel tip hitting against the lid of Becky's grave. At this point, I was a rabid fool, down in the muddy depths of the plot hole, groaning, clawing, and pulling at the edges of the coffin lid. I wanted it. I needed it. And as I yanked with all my might and the lid finally let loose, I received my bride in all her putrid glory. I grabbed my light and witnessed it all. Amongst the crumbled wood, I beheld her rotting face, earthworms protruding from every orifice, her gray stringy hair floating in the puddle of brown mess that had already entered the coffin. My hands caressed the translucent, soapy flesh of the corpse's cheeks. My fingers poked inside to the splintering bone underneath. The worms and maggots crawled onto me, just as they had with her, wanting to feast upon my living flesh. As we became one, it happened. I heard the creaking joints come alive and felt a cold, rotting hand grasp my arm. Rebecca Kring was a living being once again, and through her touch I saw, deep in the recesses of my mind, the fire itself. I breathed the smoke into my lungs. I saw the burial. I heard the whispers. Her crumbling jaws opened, and she spoke 2 words to her suitor as her teeth fell about. I am. According to John and Derek, I returned to the car about 3 hours after they left me, stumbling about in a complete daze. I wouldn't say one word to them. As I stated before, diggers don't say, they only do. It really didn't take long at all to notice the changes. Hell, I felt something from the moment I woke up the very next day. Either I lost something at Becky's grave, or maybe I brought something back. Wasn't sure. All I knew was that I felt things less. A kind of constant inebriation, but without a drink or drug. Sounds were muffled, lights were dimmed. Nerve endings were no longer doing their normal work. I was floating, numb to the pains of the physical world. But of course, I couldn't let anyone know, not even my fellow diggers. I played the game as best as I could, especially around my parents. I still lived at home, and I couldn't completely avoid interaction with them. Beyond the physical issues I was experiencing, there was another problem I was concerned with. Some memory of the attempted exhumation eventually returned to me. It was a botched experiment, an unfinished one at that. What did I do? Did I leave the open grave just like that? With Becky's corpse left in the open for any onlookers or animals to do with as they pleased? And how did I even make it out of that mud pit on my own? I had broken my own rules, and I was just hoping that my errors wouldn't come back to haunt me. I attempted to gain enough bravery to return to the grave and finish the job, but the thought of coming face to face with the witch once again was too much for my weak little mind to handle. I couldn't even bring myself to ask Derek or John to do it for me. I didn't want to introduce them to whatever forces were at play in that damn swamp. I was already doing a pretty good job of ignoring their calls. They were looking for another payday, I was sure, but I was afraid that my days as a digger were most likely over, at least temporarily. At the end of the first week, a new symptom came upon me. My breath. It began to stink. Even my dulled sense of smell could pick it up. It was like that of a rotting tooth, ripe with infection. I began to keep a secret stock of mouthwash in my closet, but it was barely enough to get by. My mother insisted on getting me to the dentist as soon as possible, but I skirted the situation. I simply stopped speaking as much, to try to hide it as much as possible. Soon after, I noticed I was losing weight as well, and that my skin was becoming pale and itchy. There wasn't much that I could hide with this. It was just a matter of time before some intervention was needed, or even worse, forced upon me. I thought back to the ghost hunter and what his friends said about his last months on Earth. And I had gone so much further than he. I had not only found the grave, but I went inside. A line was crossed. But to what price? In the midst of my body falling apart, I did attempt to keep some semblance of normalcy in my life. I just graduated, and I already had an interview scheduled at the local warehouse. Now that the digging was on hold, I needed to make as much money as I could. My parents knew that I wasn't feeling well, so they urged me to cancel, but I wouldn't have it. And so I put on the best clothes I had, covered my neck in cologne, doused my throat and mouth with antiseptic rinse, and went on my interview. Unfortunately, I should have listened to my parents. I will never forget the man's face. The absolute horror and disgust. Everything was going fine at first. I was acing all of the interviewers' questions, and I was closing in on sealing the deal. We were going over whatever meager wage that was going to be offered to me, and then, all of a sudden, I sneezed. A spray of bright red blood covered the man's desk and paperwork, and I heard a clicking sound as something rolled over the desk and onto his lap. He picked it up, aghast with the horror show that the interview had turned into. A tooth! He held it out in the palm of his hand, offering it back to me, as his other hand covered his mouth as he dry heaved into it. Obviously appalled, I busted out of the office as fast as I could, embarrassed and covered in blood. The interviewer followed me into the parking lot to see if I was okay, but I was already shifted into gear and speeding home. Obviously, things were getting much, much worse. Thankfully, when I returned home, my parents were off running errands, which allowed me to clean myself up without any questions or concerns on their part. Eventually, the bleeding from the nose stopped altogether, and when I checked out the tooth situation, I realized that all of my teeth were loosening, and my gums were starting to recede down to the very roots. The stink was that of a dead animal by this point. As I looked into the mirror at the absolute creature I was becoming, I winced at the patches of red that were now forming upon my pallid, sunken face. Whatever curse that I had brought upon myself was progressing. But what was the endgame? More days passed with myself hiding in my room, door locked. Any sporadic appearances into the living room or kitchen were quick. I wore a hooded sweatshirt at all times to hide my concerning form. My hair had begun to fall out. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I was like a fucking ghost. Avoidance was key. Limited speaking, mainly consisting of yes or no. I knew that I was running out of time. My parents would surely act soon. I began to scratch at the red splotches on my ravaged face as they became unbearably itchy. But when I did, the skin broke open and I bled, but not red. It was black and thick. I was becoming necrotic. The flesh was fucking dying. I tried so very hard to deny it. I tried to take my mind somewhere else, to a place where I was healthy, to a time when I wasn't a digger, a damned ghoul. It became undeniable, however, when I relieved myself into the toilet and saw the thick, dark brown fluid that was left behind. It reminded me of old motor oil. It was no longer just my outer shell rotting, but my insides as well. Who could help me? Who would believe me? Rebecca Kring did this. She lives as I die. And so, I am. Just as the words that Becky spoke to me on that very night. But soon, hopefully, I will cease to be. I sit here on my bathroom floor amongst a pile of flesh, fingernails, teeth, and hair. I've fallen apart, yet I am still here. I hold the razor blade in my rotten fingertips, though I can't feel anything at all. The skin of my wrist spread open and the black flows. Will the curse finally leave me? Will I finally die? Or will I be left to contend with a living death until there is simply nothing left of me? I prepare myself for the end. My black heart beats faster. The soiled breath quickens. A deathly panic comes over me. But it must be done. Diggers don't say, they only do. Honey, are you okay in there? Your father and I want to talk to you.